Welcome, welcome, one and aren't I so glad to see you? As you can see, I'm not all myself. It's Halloween, and I'm on vacation. Oh, this. Mm, I hate it. It's not my nice clownish self. But oh well. I figure, hey, it's close to Halloween. I get to come up here in the nice cool air, dress up a little bit, and we're all gonna have a nice time. And what's a better time to have right now than a good old spooky ghost story? And I got just the one for you all. This tragic tale begins with an infant. Now, everyone knows sons, daughters, mothers, fathers. There's always something to fight amongst each other, right? You can't always understand your children. But what if your child is something better, stronger, different? I mean, I wouldn't call it different. I'd call it an improvement, but hey. Some people just can't have things the best way, right? So let's begin. There is something wrong, son.
There's something terribly wrong with my son. He is only 4 months old, but I can still tell that he isn't acting like himself. He used to laugh whenever I made funny faces, but now he just stares at me. He stares at me with a blank, yet strange expression. He used to cry at night, just like a normal infant, but now he just lies there, looking at the ceiling from the comfort of his crib. It's downright weird. I'm not even sure if he's sleeping anymore. Every time I get up in the middle of the night to check on him, he's just lying there with the same facial expression, staring at nothing. He stares at nothing, that is, until I enter the room. Then he turns his attention to me. I don't like it. I truly don't. I decided to take the little guy to the doctor's office shortly after this string of occurrences began. As unsettling as the ordeal seemed, I was more concerned than anything else. This was my child, after all, and being a single parent tends to leave little room for me to do much else but worry. Sometimes I wish I had someone to share the burden with. For now, it's just me and him. Upon arriving at the doctor's office, I noticed that there were others in the waiting room. A mother, her son, and their service dog. Fairly certain the mother was deaf. The boy looked to be about 3 years of age. He looked over at us and smiled, but his amused demeanor was abruptly replaced with what appeared to be a look of terror. He scrambled over to his mom's leg and hid behind it. This is when the dog looked over at us and began barking wildly. It was the weirdest thing. The mother managed to calm both her son and dog down, and the three of them took their turn with Dr. Harrison. They eventually left, leaving only my son and me. We continued to wait while Dr. Harrison prepared for our appointment. The time that then passed must have amounted to only a few mere minutes, but it felt like a hell of a lot longer. I could see my son staring at me out of the corner of my field of vision. I could feel his eyes piercing through mine, even though I refused to look back at him. I can't explain it, but an odd sense of anxiety began growing within me. Luckily, Dr. Harrison came out and saved me from my private anguish. It sounds awful, but I could not bear to be alone with my son any longer. I spoke with Dr. Harrison and explained everything that had been going on, being careful not to tell him about what had just happened in the waiting room. I didn't want him thinking it was crazy. He performed the usual tests on my son and told me that he was a perfectly normal and healthy baby. He even told me that I was lucky that he was so calm at his age. Lucky? Really? I could not wrap my head around this. No, I wasn't. And no, my son was not normal. Normal babies don't act this way. They just don't. I could have ignored the situation and chalked it up to an odd phase that he was going through. One that would hopefully pass in the coming months. But not only did it not pass, it also became much, much worse. I tucked my son into his crib just a few nights ago and tried my best to ignore the blank glance that he threw my way. I turned off the light and went to bed. This was my normal routine. At roughly 3 in the morning, I woke up. I don't know why I woke up at such an odd time. I usually sleep through the night, like a baby, for lack of a less ironic phrase. I am, however, glad I woke up when I did, due to what I found upon waking. Well, glad in a sense. There, on all fours, crawling about in my bed, was none other than my son. How was that even possible? I quickly looked over at the crib. It was just how I left it. There was no way he could have crawled out of there at his age. He surely would have hit the floor with a loud thud and injured himself. So how exactly did he get from his crib to my bed? How? I put my son back in his crib and tried to go back to sleep. I found this task to be nearly impossible, as I couldn't get the image of my son out of my head. When he was crawling on my bed, he was crawling towards me. Not only this, but he still had that blank expression on his face, staring at me as he crawled, his eyes never wavering. He didn't blink, not even once. Why was he crawling in my direction? What would he do when he finally reached me? The questions that filled my frightened brain were too much for me to simply go back to sleep. I stayed up for the rest of the night and spent most of it staring at my son's crib. Eventually, my weariness did catch up with me. Shortly after the sun came up over the horizon, I passed out. It must have been a good hour before I woke up again. After rubbing my eyes a few times and looking over at the crib, I realized something. My son was not in it. I jumped up quickly and investigated. I tossed his blankets around, only to find that it really was empty. He was gone. I looked over at my bed, but he was not there either. I turned my apartment upside down looking for him. I checked every room, every little nook and cranny I could possibly find. While doing this, there was quite a large knot in the pit of my stomach. I could neither tell if I was worried for my son's safety, or if I was just plain scared. Perhaps it was a bit of both. I finished scouring my apartment and went back to my room to catch my breath. What I saw nearly took it away again. There, lying in his crib, was my son, as calm as could be. Walked over to the crib and just stared at him. He, of course, stared back with that unnerving expression of his. I realized then that I was truly frightened of an infant. I looked at him for a few more moments before speaking. "What are you?" His eyes widened upon hearing me speak. I cannot be certain, but I think that maybe, for just a split second, my son may have grinned at me.
Boy, oh boy, wasn't that fantastic? I know it's a bit short, but trust me, 4 parts to this and they'll be coming at you. And that child, oh, he's a smart one, ain't he? He's able to listen to you even though he's only a few months old. I know what you're thinking. Oh, he's demonic, he's possessed. Oh, come on now. What's so wrong with that? It's a better version of your child. Smart. We can understand you like that. In about a year's time, he's gonna be ready to drive. 2 years, ready for a job. In 3 years, he's racking up them kills already. Is that so wrong? But anyway, as I said before, this is a 4-parter. So we'll be coming back with the parts real soon. So there's a change of plans here. Was gonna wait to show off some more, but it turns out landlords are dicks, and I gotta get out of this Airbnb as soon as possible. But don't worry, we'll finish these stories up real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and read off part 2 to y'all now. How's that? In this part, our poor father's gonna make some good old home movies. But when dealing with these supernatural things, you better be careful, or that whole movie might actually turn out to be a horror movie. Anyway, on to part 2.
It has been almost a week since my son crawled up onto my bed, somehow. Since then, I have set up a video camera in the room just to see what it might catch. The camera makes me feel safer than I did before, and now it sounds ridiculous, but I think it is the camera that's keeping him from doing anything else. Either way, at least I managed to get a little bit of sleep at night now that it's there. The camera is of decent quality. It has night vision, HD audio capture, everything I need to watch over the actions of my son at night. If he even so much as moves a limb, I will see and hear it. I finally had a way to combat my woes, but setting up this expensive piece of equipment did make me feel foolish. It's one thing to monitor your child for their own safety, but I was in fact spying on my son to see if he was up to something. It wasn't for his safety, it was for mine. I know it sounds crazy. I know. But what happened next did confirm my suspicion, but only to a small extent. Until last night, the footage was completely normal. My son slept through the night as I tossed and turned, thinking that perhaps I was pretending to sleep for the camera's sake. The second night of recording, however, was a bit strange. The first few hours were normal, much like the night before, but that was when my son did something surprising. Using his tiny, undeveloped arms and legs, he stood up in his crib, using the bars to lean on. He adjusted himself to face the camera and stared at it. He stared for a solid 12.5 minutes with that horribly unsettling, blank expression of his before lying back down. The part that really gets me is about halfway through the clip, where he actually lets go of the bars and is standing up on his own for a few moments. This, to me, was utterly inexplicable. I was shocked. A plethora of theories bombarded my mind at an alarming rate, from the mundane to the sinister. Maybe he was just advanced for his age, having the ability to not only stand up straight, but also escape the confines of his crib and crawl up onto my bed like he'd done it almost a week previously. I quickly discarded this thought, deeming it nearly impossible. Perhaps he isn't my son at all. Maybe he is something else entirely. Not even a he, but an it. I discarded this theory as well, not wanting to give in to any notions of the supernatural. It just wasn't logical. I knew I would have to speak with Dr. Harrison again to potentially put my weary mind at ease. I had already made an appointment to see Dr. Harrison again later in the week, but after seeing this footage, I had him squeeze me in early. I made my way to his office once again, son and all, and patiently sat in the waiting room. I paid no attention to my son's blank stare like before, but it still made me feel uneasy. As we waited, his stare became increasingly more difficult to ignore. For whatever reason, I felt compelled to look back down at him, even though I knew it would make me anxious to do so. Even so, I turned my head downward and stared at him. His eyes. There was something wrong with his eyes. Couldn't quite put my finger on it. There was something terribly off about them. They were the same eyes, but they seemed different. I don't quite know how to explain it. Luckily, Dr. Harrison came out of hiding, putting an end to our nerve-wracking staring match. What a relief. I don't know why, but I feel like I would have just kept staring at my son, seemingly to no end. Rather than dwelling on my inner fearful inclinations, I focused on the task at hand. Skipping the seemingly normal parts of the video, I showed Dr. Harrison the odd occurrence from the second night. He watched in awe as my 4-month-old son stood up on his own and faced the camera. Becoming impatient, I asked for his thoughts on it. You know what he had to say? He actually congratulated me on having such a well-developed child. He said that my son was advanced for his age and that he was glad to have helped him along in the process, as if he had anything to do with it. Telling him about the night he crawled under my bed, he did no results either. It only added to his already oversaturated ego. I was absolutely flabbergasted by his reaction. In any case, I did manage to get the receptionist to refer me to a specialist in infant behavior on my way out. I desperately needed someone to talk to that wasn't completely oblivious to the matter. I went home both angry at Dr. Harrison and exhausted from the ordeal, mentally as well as physically. I put my son in his crib, being careful not to look at his eyes again, as much as I felt the need to. I then went out to the living room and sat down on the couch in an attempt to unwind. I shut my eyes for but a moment and quickly fell asleep. I dreamt. was sitting on the couch, just like I was before falling asleep. I tried getting up, but my legs and arms felt very heavy and sluggish. I gave in to the situation and just sat there. I took a look around and noticed that the room looked a little bit different. The frames I had up on the wall containing pictures of my wife and son were now empty. It was then that I began to feel dizzy as a strange knot grew in my stomach. I felt a need to look over to my left, towards the bedroom. There, standing up on his own, was my son. He was at the doorway to the bedroom, just staring at me. Before I could even privately react, he began walking. In an awkward slush of movement, my son walked towards me. His stride was grotesque and unnatural, causing the knot in my stomach to grow larger. He continued to walk until finally reaching a spot just a few inches from where I was sitting. He reached his hand out towards me as I watched in horror. What was he gonna do? Why was this happening? Why? I woke up before my son's hand could reach me. I jumped up in fear and, still half asleep, and ran into the bedroom. I rushed over to the crib and a wave of relief overcame me. I woke up before my son's hand could reach me. I jumped up in fear, still half asleep, and ran into the bedroom. I rushed over to the crib and a wave of relief overcame me. He was still in there, staring blankly up at me, like he always did. Thank goodness. I walked back over to the couch and sat down to collect my thoughts. It seems that even in my sleep I'm not safe. This mess that I found myself in is causing me not only a great deal of stress, but also to have nightmares. I need it to end. I will be giving the specialist a call shortly to set up an appointment. In the meantime, it's back to square one, trying to get some shut-eye while recording the actions of my son, in the hopes of finding some answers. It seems that this is what our little family has come to. We now lie at a cross-section of strange and completely mad. I, for one, just want everything to be over and done with so I can finally get a good night's rest.
So how's that for the first two parts, eh? Now what do you think about that? A child coming forth from your own loins, suddenly no longer your own. What could have happened? Possession? Maybe sort of mind control? Or maybe he was never yours to begin with. Oh, what sweet horror we've wrought. But that's enough out of me. I will go ahead and read the next two parts shortly in the next video, and then we'll be done with this story. Maybe I'll have enough time to read the next before he comes back. Till then, have sweet dreams, and beware of those nightmares.